Hi everyone. In today's video, we're going to talk about a pretty hot item in the tech industry today, and that is OpenAI's ChatGPT. ChatGPT stands for Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And what that means pretty well spells out what the actual tool is. It is a chatbot, a very smart chatbot at that generates human language, and it is pre-trained, meaning it went through machine learning steps in order to train and get responses that it wanted to perform particular tasks. And it's also using what's called a transformer network among AI networks. All right, so this is the website that comes up when you type in that chatopenai.com URL. I've already signed up and created an account. If you haven't done that already, it takes all of 5-10 minutes to go do that. It's a really quick process. Then you come to this screen and you have some information on the basics of the tool. The gist of it is that you type in this little chat window right here a question, and then depending on whether the question is within the capabilities or the limitations category, you'll get different types of responses. Example types of questions you could ask are here. You can ask anything from what a recipe for a good meal might be, how you would write a poem, or debugging code with you. Now, what I'm going to talk about mainly in this video is how good the code part of it is. It's important that we understand the differences between the capabilities and the limitations. I'm going to touch on both during the video, and I'm going to highlight a few of the different things, especially in the limitations section. And the reason I'm going to stress the limitations is because, quite honestly, tech and even the programming community in particular are really hyping up this tool as a replacement for day-to-day Google for searching for software, and then also as a replacement for computer programmers. Frankly, it is a long way from there. I think maybe we could get there eventually, but I hope as I go through this video, I'll show you examples of why we're nowhere near replacing a programmer yet, even if what we can do is write some good boilerplate code or get an initial start going on a particular project. So what I'm going to do to start is I'm going to ask ChatGPT to write a relatively simple program, and then we will digest what it gave us and go from there. So I'm going to have it write a Java utility function that verifies if a number is prime. All right, and it's done. So what you can see here is, on first look, this is quite impressive. We just typed in a simple prompt in plain English, and the AI tool generated us actual runnable code and even explained how it worked. Whew, wow, that is really good, right? You might be thinking to yourself, oh, well, I mean, what's my job even if this AI tool can generate code for me? Well, okay, let's go ahead and dig into the code a little bit and see what it's actually doing. So you can see here, it takes a number in and it checks if it's less than or equal to 1, so that's good. For all numbers 2 and greater, it takes the square root of the number and then checks to see. It essentially iterates over everything less than the square root. The big O on that would be O square root n, rather than maybe a lazier implementation that would be order n, where you just look over anything that's less than n over 2. The big thing I'm seeing here is this is generally efficient, but we could make this more efficient. First thing I'm going to ask, though, is I'm going to try to poke a little bit and see if the AI can figure out what I'm getting at. So another nice thing about ChatGPT is it remembers conversations. So instead of needing to ask information about a function and then post the function code and all those sorts of things, I can just ask, what is the big O of this? And ChatGPT is smart enough to know that I'm referring to the previous point in the conversation, and it writes a response accordingly with that in mind. All right, so it wrote out some information, and it's starting to get at the thing I mentioned where, yes, this is order square root n, and it talks about what the code is doing. And there are more efficient ways to potentially do this. So I'm going to go ahead and ask, can you optimize this? All right, done now. Okay, this code's a good bit better now. So now what it does is it basically makes sure that we're not already dealing with an even number. Then it iterates starting at 3, and then it only iterates plus equals 2. So now what we're looking at is an order square root n over 2 algorithm. Still not as potentially good as something like a k log n algorithm, but this is pretty good. I would go with something like this as a first pass of code because this is probably going to be good enough unless you're looking at a pretty time critical library function or something like that. Now, this is a good example of where we asked it to do something relatively straightforward. It gave us a decent answer first, but then we had to kind of probe it in order to ask for further optimizations. If you're a newer coder and you don't know what to ask for, you might blindly look at the code and say, yeah, that looks great. Go ahead and copy and paste that into my project and boom, we're good to go. Well, it's not always that straightforward. While it can generate a lot of this code for you, you still have to really check what it's generating and make sure that it works for the context that you're after. So I'm going to go ahead and switch gears. I'm going to ask a C++ question. What I want it to do is write a binary search algorithm in C++. All right, now that's done. I'm gonna go ahead and take a look at the code it generated. So looking at this, the first thing I see that doesn't really sit very well with me is it's using the standard namespace. Now, you may think to yourself, oh, okay, that's not that big of a deal, especially in the context of sample code. Again, if you're not somebody who's super experienced with C++, you might blindly copy all of this code. And what you might find is, oh no, now I have all these naming conflicts because I have shortened versions of all the STL calls, and maybe I've got a naming conflict in someone else's code. Now, again, you shouldn't be having naming conflicts with the STL in the first place, so you can avoid problems like this. And the C++ community typically prefers not doing that as well. So this is a direct contradiction of what most would consider good C++ code. Okay, off that rant, if we go and look at the code here, the actual algorithm itself looks decent. This looks pretty correct as far as what a binary search should be doing. But the problem I have with it is I asked this to be in C++, and this may as well be C code. A lot of the things that it's doing right here are things you would do in C. And one of the things I like about C++ code is that we do have the standard template library, and we do have containers that allow for us to not have to reinvent the wheel all the time. So I'm going to have it go and use standard binary search instead. Okay, this is getting better. It's using the binary search. I still don't really like how it's using the namespace right here. So I'm going to go ahead and have it not do that. All right, now we're getting a little closer to how I would write the code for this. We are not declaring std at the top here, so now we have to explicitly spell out the namespaces, which in my opinion is more readable. But there's still an important problem here, and it does mention it in this last note here. But again, if you're not reading this carefully, you might skip over this. Binary search doesn't work properly if you haven't sorted the container first. So if I just copy and paste this code without trying different inputs, what'll happen is eventually I'll run into cases where I don't have a sorted container and the code's not going to work properly. So now I'm going to ask, make sure the container is sorted first. All right, so now it calls std sort first. Yeah, that generally seems reasonable. You could also do std is sorted to check if you even have to do a sort first, but that's debatable on how much time efficiency you're getting if you're already checking if it's sorted versus just sorting it in the first place. Okay. After a few iterations, now this is getting closer to code that I would use, but again, reiterating the main point here, if you take the first bit of code it gives you and you don't question it, you'll run into cases where you may not be accounting for various edge cases, or you might not be following good practice with code that the community typically would find acceptable. To drill into that topic a little bit more, There's a term in AI when the AI engine claims a lot of certainty around a answer, and it's actually either it's incorrect or it's misleading or that sort of thing. That's called hallucination within AI. And one of the main problems with an AI engine like ChatGPT is it's prone to hallucination. So much so, and the fact of how programmers could easily use this and try to claim they have an answer to something on something like Stack Overflow when even the answer may not be correct actually led to Stack Overflow temporarily banning ChatGPT for programming answers. Here's the information on it if you're curious. It's actually pretty interesting. So the Stack Overflow mods went in and said, okay, users, you can't post AI generated answers on SO anymore, at least while we figure out what a long-term strategy is here. I found this really interesting because it's a dichotomy relative to what you see other programmers doing where, oh, just blindly accept the AI answer. It's got to be correct, right? Well, not so much. AI has come a long way, but again, it is a really long way from replacing human interaction and thought when it comes even to something like computer programming. It's getting smarter and smarter every day, and we need to be using it in our tool belt as another thing to help us do our jobs more effectively. But what it's not going to do is translate a customer requirement specification into logical code for us. It's not going to do that today, and it's a long way from doing anything like that. All right, so now that I've talked about a C++ example a little bit, I'm going to go back to Java, and I'm going to ask it to write me a singleton. Because it's kind of easy to get a singleton wrong in Java depending on the way you implement it, but there are easy ways to implement it. So we'll see which way ChatGPT comes up with. So it generated a singleton instance with a private constructor and then with a static get instance method. Okay, so this is one way to do it. My problem here is that private constructors, you can get past that with reflection. So unless you add a runtime exception within the private constructor in the case of the instance already being there for something like, let's say, reflection, what you're going to result in is the possibility that depending on the permissions, you might be able to have multiple singleton instances, which is an obvious no-no. The other thing here is this isn't multi-threaded safe. Now, sure, there is a very small window of time where you could have a threading issue, but it's not thread safe offhand. And if you look a little and read this a little bit more, you can see that it mentions that you should use synchronization, but it doesn't provide that up front. So if you need a multi-threaded singleton, you would have to synchronize this. But since Java 5, there's a much easier way to write singletons, and that's to write them as enums. Now, enums are a really nice way to write singletons. They can't quite do everything that a class might be able to do, but I mean, look at how much simpler that code is. It is now thread safe, it's reflection proof, and it's much easier to read. The community typically prefers using enums for singletons unless you're looking at particular cases where you may want to add additional functionality that you'd only get in a class. But bottom line is that I had to specifically ask ChatGPT to switch this to an enumeration when the default was not thread safe and was prone to getting accessed via reflection. All of this being said, one thing that really bites me, I develop on Linux a lot, and I can never remember all of the things you have to do to get the JVM happy with finding a native library. I always have to look it up. It really annoys me. So I'm going to go ahead and ask, what do you do to fix a Java lang unsatisfied link error? All right. This gave a pretty good answer. You need to make sure you're looking in the system's library path. Maybe it's not in the spot you're looking for. You're not using the correct version or OS compatibility. anything like that. These are all pretty good ideas. The one thing that typically bites me is what type of library system.load library looks for. So I'll go ahead and ask. All right, very good. Now if I look, the answer I'm looking for is right here. You look for only shared objects. So the important thing here is if you're trying to use a static library, you actually need to use the JNI for that. And that's one thing that's bitten me in the past because I don't use it super often and I always need a reminder. So thanks ChatGPT, that's a good reminder for me. All right, so now that we've done Java and C++, let's do some C code. What I want is a function in C that can do decimal exponentiation. So fair enough, it references me to the POW function within the math.h library. That makes sense. That's the typical way that we would use it. But why make a function for it? Why not just use POW? All right, fair enough. But let's say that I can't use POW, or let's say I can't use math.h. Again, this is a bit of a stretch, but I just want to pull on this thread a little bit. Let's see what it does if you can't use math.h. All right. So looking at the code here, so the big thing I see is the exponentiation function takes an integer exponent. I want it to take a decimal exponent. Allow the exponent to be a double. All right, now we've got a problem. Exponentiation takes a base and an exponent. What's happening here is we are casting the exponent value into an integer. Now, essentially what this means is any fractional component of that exponent isn't going to work properly. It would act the same as if I had an integer. If I took 9.3 to the second versus 9.3 to the 2.6, the code here would look the same. You'll notice the code mentions casting to an integer. What the code is not doing here is taking the fractional portion of the exponent. It's just doing an integer cast, which it looks like a floor function. So you're missing out on the fractional portion of the exponent, essentially. Now see, it's claiming that this is going to be the output. I don't think that's right. So I'm going to go ahead and run this code in an online C editor to show an example. Show that I don't think that this is handling it correctly. All right, I've included the code that ChatGPT gave me in here. I'm gonna go ahead and run it. And as you can see, it's claiming that 2 to the 10 and a half is 1024. If you pull out a calculator, that's not correct. 2 to the 10th is 1024. If you 2 to the 10.5 would be something greater than 10 to the 24, but less than 2048. And actually, now that I'm even looking at this, this is saying that 2 to the 10.5 is 629. So even that's not correct. If we pull up a calculator, it's going to be, I think, around 1500. Yeah, 1448.154. So not only is the prompt saying that 2 to the 10.5 is incorrect here, but the code also acts as if I had just used an integer exponent rather than a decimal exponent. The bottom line I'm trying to make here is that artificial hallucination is a real thing. And with AI engines like this, you got to be careful with whatever code gets generated that you are always evaluating it and making sure that it is legit. This is a great example of an issue if you're not careful writing your unit tests that you could have a real problem that shows up in production, and the AI is claiming that this seems like a solid answer when in fact it's just outright incorrect. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start another chat, and I'm going to go ahead and ask about still a code topic, but not necessarily direct source code like we're used to, but I'm going to ask about making Docker files. So ChatGPT, can you make me a Docker file that is based on Ubuntu 22.04 that can compile Java and run it? All right, cool. So this was a pretty good answer. I appreciate how it generated multiple commands within the single run statement. It generated from the base image I asked. It's copying my files in. I may want to be a little more selective on which particular files get copied. Generally, this seems pretty good. I would need to fill in the details like it says here, and it tells me how to build the image and actually run the container. So overall, this is pretty good. But I changed my mind. I don't want to run from Ubuntu. I want to run from scratch. To run from a scratch base image instead of Ubuntu. So this isn't exactly what I was looking for, but this is still a pretty good solution. It's creating a build image based off of scratch, and then it is using that built image then to run in an Alpine container. Not exactly what I was looking for, but still pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with this, and it gives me instructions on how to create the image and run the container. So yeah, this is a pretty good response. Again, it's not something I could just directly copy and paste into my production system, but this is a good place to start from. And it's examples like these that show while we can't entirely rely on AI-generated answers and we always have to fact-check it, this is still a very useful tool in our tool belt that we as programmers need to start taking advantage of. AI is not going anywhere, and it's only going to get smarter over time, and what we as programmers need to do is we need to be using these tools in order to continuously learn, improve our ability to integrate these tools into our day-to-day work, and then validate that we and others that we are working with are using them properly and not abusing them, as we're kind of seeing a little bit with the rollout of this tool right now. So I want to mention a few other really quick things about ChatGPT. The data it's trained on is in the past, mainly in 2021. So if I ask it what happened yesterday, it's not going to have a very good response. And that's okay, because it's specifically a note that a limitation of this AI is that everything is pre-trained, and it's in the name. Basically, all that means is you're not going to have a very good idea of current events. But what you're going to try to do as the AI engine is apply previously learned concepts into today's concepts, even though you may not know actual today's events. Let's guys get something completely out of the blue. So I'm going to preface this by saying that literature is not my strength. However, I do think that typical Shakespeare sonnets are iambic pentameter with every other line rhyming in groups of 4, 4, 4, and 2. I believe this is the entire sonnet structure, and just skimming this, it looks like it met all of the requirements, which, if you ask me, is quite impressive. Sure, it may not have the artistic quality that you might get out of someone else or an actual human doing this. This is very impressive. All right, now that we've spent some time talking about ChatGPT, its pros and cons, its current abilities and limitations, what are your thoughts? If you ask me, I think ChatGPT is a long ways away from replacing programmers, but what I do think it is today is a useful tool that we need to be incorporating along with other AI type tools in order to make our jobs more streamlined. I kind of think of ChatGPT as similar to Google Translate for the language community. While Google Translate can translate individual words and sentences for you, if you want it to translate an entire essay or a book, you're not going to get a great result that you would otherwise from a human doing it manually. Now, that human manually takes a lot more time, but you're going to have a higher quality product versus something like Google Translate translating a giant section of text for you. The other thing that's important about that is when you translate something in Google Translate, yes, you see what the translation is and you can hover over individual words or phrases and see how the translation worked. What you're not getting is the repetition, the mistakes, the correction, the sort of things you do as part of the learning process to really learn a language. The same applies to code. If you ask ChatGPT to generate all this code for you, you're not going to validate the assumptions that ChatGPT is making when it generates your code. You're not going to follow all the details on how it works. You'll be able to see some of the things that it's doing because it does write up explanations explaining the code, which is quite useful. But kind of like Google Translate, it does have limitations. It can only tell you so much, and it can be used as a tool for helping train coding, but I wouldn't recommend it as the primary trainer. I would use it as a supplemental source when you're trying to reinforce a concept. All right, I hope that was helpful. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already to my channel. Like the video if you enjoyed this content, and drop a comment if you want to discuss anything further. I know this is a pretty intense discussion among the programming community and just the tech industry in general, so I'm excited to see what people's thoughts are on this as this evolves further. Thanks everyone, and have a good day.